I'm Flavia Belieni Zimmerman from the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Western Australia, and today we have with us Honourable Robert French, former Chief Justice of the High Court, and you'll be discussing the topic of tonight's address: if Santa Claus is a person of concern for international relations. Thank you for being with us, Honourable French.
Thank you.
In the light of your experience in the High Court, what are the most important issues to international relations?
Well, our courts are concerned not directly with international relations. They have to apply the law, and that is Australian law made by Australian parliaments, and also our constitution. Sometimes legal questions come up which affect our international relations or are affected by them. So, for example, we have foreign states immunity legislation, which protects foreign governments from being sued in Australian courts unless they've engaged in commercial transactions. And there have been a couple of cases of that kind. Otherwise, we may get cases which have international law implications because they are brought under Australian laws which are giving effect to international conventions or treaties. A very frequent source of litigation in the High Court and in our Federal Court has been the Migration Act and provisions of the Migration Act which support the implementation of Australia's obligations under the Refugees Convention. So there have been a number of cases which have involved the interpretation of the Refugees Convention, and when we get into the business of interpreting international conventions as part of our domestic legal system, then of course we are looking to the way that those conventions are interpreted in other countries around the world to assist in our own interpretation. So there's quite an engagement there. Then, of course, there's quite a bit of law which brings in international trade and commerce and international commercial arbitration. So we have a number of conventions around the world which do things like set up, for example, common form commercial instruments, the Convention on the International Sale of Goods, which has a common form contract. And then you have, in order that trade and commerce around the world can work smoothly, if people are operating according to the same rules across borders, that's a help. And that's all part of an important part of international relations, that being international trade. There are many other areas in that field which we could talk about if we have time.
Thank you very much, Honourable French. And could you please explain to us the role that Australian judges play in international relations?
Well, we have a lot of dialogue with judges from other courts through sometimes their seminars or colloquia or conferences, and we invite judges from other courts to come to Australia and visit us, or we go and visit judges in other countries or join with other judges in international conferences. Last year I led a judicial delegation from Australia to Beijing, and we spoke there with this was at the invitation of the President of the Supreme People's Court, which is the highest court in the People's Republic of China, and I think we were the 34th foreign judicial delegation that had visited them. So they've really been engaging in a kind of outreach exercise, trying to pick up ideas which will be useful to them in the ongoing development of their own judicial system. In Singapore there has been set up recently an Asian Business Law Institute, and the object of that is to try and find ways in which particularly commercial laws in our region, the Asian region, can be made more compatible with each other, so it's easier for people to do business. Now there are 4 members of that institute. They are China, India, Australia and Singapore, and we have on the Board of Governance of that institute, along with the former Chief Justice of Victoria, Marilyn Warren, and Kevin Lindgren, who is a former judge of the Federal Court. And the Indian Supreme Court is represented, as is the Supreme Court of China, and the Chief Justice of Singapore acts as the chairperson. And there are a number of projects which that Board of Governance is supervising at the present time. You also find that our judges, and more particularly our retired judges, get involved in offshore judicial activities, so that I am a member of the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal. It's as what they call a non-permanent justice, and there are several other Australian justices, former Chief Justice Gleeson, former Justice Gummow of the High Court, and former Chief Justice Spiegelman of the Supreme Court of New South Wales are members of that bench, and there are a number of serving English judges who are also on that court. They'll only sit one of us at a time with the 4 local judges, so you only get to sit there probably once a year, but I sat there in June and July of this year, and it was a very, very interesting exercise. And that happened to be the 20th anniversary of the return of Hong Kong to China. So there was lots happening at the time, including a visit by President Xi.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you very much, Honourable French. And just wrapping up our interview, Honourable French, can you please just explain to us how Santa Claus can be seen as a person of concern to international relations?
Well, I'm using this as a vehicle for talking about our international legal order, but when you think about it, Santa Claus employs, allegedly at the North Pole, a lot of elves in round-the-year work in conditions which probably contravene international labour organisation conventions. Although Canada has taken the opportunity of his residence in the North Pole to claim him as a Canadian citizen, because they are making a claim to the Arctic seabed up there under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. He's involved in the international transportation of animals, and there is a convention about that and about animal welfare. He appears not to be complying with the International Civil Air Travel, the Chicago Convention on International Air Travel, and bringing a lot of goods into a lot of countries without actually declaring them or having them inspected. So there are a whole array of ways in which Santa Claus is of concern, and the question is, and it's a nice way of asking the question, how in Australia, if we had to make laws about Santa Claus, would we deal with it? We might make laws under our own constitution, or we might say, right, we'll give effect to some international conventions, which should, I mean, he decides, for example, whether children of a tender age are naughty or nice. Now, what kind of judgment is that? And then there's a discrimination against them, and that would appear to be in contravention of Principle 10 of the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. So there's a lot to be said about Santa Claus in the context of international law.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us, Honourable French. And thank you for being with us. And for more information, please visit our website, www.internationalaffairs.org.au. Thank you.